Hello, today I'm gonna make a basket with some cranky needles. I sort pine needles all day, all the time, and I have some beautiful needles sometimes, and I have some less than beautiful needles. And these ones are ones that have become twisted, dry, broken, and I just have this little mangled mess of pine needles that I'm gonna go ahead and boil up and see if I can make a beautiful basket out of them, because I think I can. So I will get them hydrated and we will make a basket with some cranky needles. I've boiled some water and we're just gonna put the needles in carefully, and I'm gonna use some tongs to kind of push all the needles down into the boiling water. And let's see how good I can do this with one hand here. Carefully getting them all in. Let's see, one fell out. These ones are more independent-minded pine needles. Okay, put them in. That one keeps wanting to pop out. And then you just let them sit in the boiling hot water for a couple minutes until they're soft. And you could also soak them overnight in just cold water, and they'll soak up the water again, hydrate. And then, or you could even, well, I don't know, these ones are kind of crispy, but you could put them in a plastic bag and with some water and put them in the microwave. But this is easy enough, just to submerge them in some boiling water and let them boil for a little bit. And that's that. And then I'll be back to show you the softened needles. And here we have the needles after they've been boiled, and I've arranged them with all the heads in one direction. And just to show you how much flexibility that hydrating the needles gets is, look at this little cute one that has a curl going on. Look at how I can just straighten it out. And before it was hydrated, that would just break instantly. So these are going to be a fun basket. I like how the needles have taken on this kind of like variety of colors. So it's almost like they've got texture and patterns on them. So I think it would be a really cool basket. Like, look at this one. It dried, twisted, and obviously the sun didn't get to these spots as much. So it made a neat pattern. So, okay, let's get started. So I have also a pile of raffia that I've wet, and I'm gonna use a little piece of a straw for a coiling gauge to make sure that the coil is about the same size. You can just eyeball it, or you can get started with something like this. And then a tapestry needle with a large eye, but a narrow, keeping it narrow. You've got to, so you can go through the coil. So here's a nice piece of raffia, and I'm going to thread it up. And you can split the raffia to get it to be the right size. You could double up the raffia, but I'm gonna go for about this thickness, and it bunches up together. So then we're gonna take some pine needles. We're gonna take some pine needles and take the head off of them. So I just use my fingernail. You can use a tool, kitchen tool, but we're gonna take some of the heads off, and we're gonna not worry about broken pieces. Like this one has some broken pieces. We're just gonna make this cranky basket and get it going and see what we can do with some needles that looked like they should just be tossed, possibly. So taking some heads off, and then we're just gonna tie on the end of the raffia. Bend it down like that. And then we're going to be wrapping the raffia away from us. And when you stitch a basket, you can stitch however is comfortable for you. Like if you're right or left-handed, maybe you want to switch the other way. And also some people like to stitch bringing the raffia or the stitching material towards them. And some people like to stitch like this, where you're bringing the stitching material over and through the back. And so I'm going to be doing that because I find that when you're doing like a pine needle basket, you're going to be holding a pine needle in front like that. So it's easier for me to go over like that instead of come around the backside like that. But it's just personal preference. So, okay, so then we're going to just fold down like this and then take a stitch through. The beginning part is the most tricky part. Taking our first stitch. Okay. Keep making stitches through the coil here just to cover the pine needle, and then you can take another pine needle and stick it underneath in there to start build up the coil. And you can count stitches or you can just eyeball and do what feels right. And then when you come around to the corner, because it's kind of an oval shape and we're going to start making more of a circle, then you're going to want to take more stitches in the same spot in the corner. So in order to cover this, we're going to take like another stitch in the corner right here. And make sure this tail is in the coil too. So see now, instead of taking a stitch over here, I'm just gonna go around and come up in the same spot right there. And moving the stitches, if they wanna fall on themselves, just move them over with your fingernails, or you can use your needle. And then take another stitch in the same spot in that corner. And then you can even untwist the raffia to make it wider to cover more. And now I think I'm going to take my coiling gauge and then stick it through like this. With the broken needles, you just have to kind of carefully. And then you can stick another needle in there. And we're gonna gradually build up the coil sides, so it's gonna be a little loose at first. If your raffia, it's easier to work with raffia when it's damp, so if your raffia gets dry, then wet it again. Okay, so now that we're coming around on this side, instead of going through the middle, we're gonna move out a little and puncture through the coil. See if you can see that. I'm not going through the center anymore. I moved out a little bit, radiating out. Okay. Let's get another pine needle in there. And at this stage, you can actually start sticking pine needles in that are just single pine needles, because we're just building up the coil, and it doesn't really matter if the pine needle has just tricky in the beginning here. I'm gonna give it a little help by sticking it under the coil, like wedging it in. That one wanted to come out too. Okay, so we're gonna stick them in, wedge them in good so they don't wanna move, and then take some stitches to hold them in place. But I'll show you what I was talking about as far as not having to use a full pine needle. You can just use pieces. The next time I'll just stick in a piece. And you don't have to cover the pine needle coil completely. Some of the pine needle can be seen through, because as we get, the basket gets larger, we're gonna want to see some of our pine needles, unless that's an effect you wanna cover it. But for this basket, I want to see some of the pine needles. Just the beginning part is more wrapped. Okay, remember on the corner, we're still trying to make a rounded shape. So I'm gonna take some stitches in the same spot. And our stitches are tight, but don't pull too tight, because we wanna be able to stitch through on the next rounds. Okay. So I'm starting to allow the pine needles to be seen more. Okay, so I want to add a pine needle, but I was going to show you how you could just add a broken pine needle if I have one. Okay, so let's just make a broken pine needle. So see, I just have like a single pine needle. It's usually they come in threes. You can just stick it in the coil like that to add to the coil. Doesn't really matter. And it doesn't really matter how long it is, because you're just adding width to your coil. Add some more. So this is what comes in handy. Some people make baskets sometimes with no pine needle heads, just all the head's taken off, and so it's just a material. Maybe I'll do that with this one. We'll see. It's funny, these needles look so horrible or whatever. And now when I'm picking a pine needle, they all look so great. They don't look bad at all. You can send it through the center of the coil. That's good, because then it gets lodged in there and doesn't poke out. Okay. And just try and make even stitches. With this basket, I'm not gonna count, I decided. I'm just gonna stitch for the fun of it. Okay, so we've made enough stitches on this so that we can now start choosing a stitch pattern. And there's a variety of stitch patterns that you can do. So I think I'm gonna do the chain stitch where I'm going to pierce through the previous stitch. And I'm gonna do that for a while as I make this basket. I think I might make a plaque, like a flat basket with this, like a wall hanging. So, okay, I'm gonna keep working on it and come back, but this is the beginning to the basket. And see these beautiful needles, they're wonderful. I think we're gonna make a nice basket. Okay, so I've stitched along, and amazingly 2.5 hours later, I'm still stitching here, and I decided that there's enough space now in between the stitches that I'm gonna start a fancy stitch, and I'm gonna do spiral wheat. So basically the way that you do that is you just take a stitch. When you're right here, you do a V stitch by coming back through the same spot. And then you take your stitch over to the next spot over here. So then see how it creates a V? And you do that all the way around. And then on the next round, you're gonna do this V stitch on the left arm of each one, so that it will start to spiral around. So anyways, it was interesting because as I was stitching, I kept thinking, oh, I should put on something to listen to while I'm doing this. And then I just never did. And I just kept sitting here, not listening to anything, stitching. And that's why I was surprised that I had been doing that for 2.5 hours. And I didn't really realize that. So it's kind of a fascinating psychology doing this basket making. It's kind of relaxing to the point where you don't really think about anything else. You just kind of keep stitching all the way around and focusing on your basket, which I guess is what they say is being in the present moment. And yes, you can think about other things, but the most important thing at the moment is adding pine needles and taking stitches when you're supposed to take a stitch. So I will carry on and show you the progress once I've had a few rounds of the fancy stitch. But I think that these needles are shaping out to be a really nice basket. Oh, also, I know I said I wasn't gonna count, but it is helpful to know the starting and stopping point of your basket. So when you count out how many rows, they're even on all sides. That way you have an equal circle, because as you can see, I've started here and there's more on this side. And so there's lots of different ways to mark the beginning point of beginning. But one way that I've done is I just put a small piece of raffia on my needle, and then I just send it through and I leave it so it just moves in and out, and I can take it out when I'm done. That way I know that every time I hit this section of the basket, I have equal amount on all sides. The row is complete. So, okay, so I have continued stitching, and you can see the spiral wheat going around, and I'm gonna stop for the day. I haven't decided if I'm gonna keep going or if I'm just gonna end it and just have it be a small tray, or I could keep going. I also can decide if I'm gonna do, like, maybe I'll do a row of wrapping and then I'll carry on with a different design. So, but I've been stitching since about 11:30, and it's 5 now. So about 5.5 hours, and maybe 5 hours, and it's about 6 inches. So, and I've used just about 2 ounces of pine needles. So that gives you an idea of how much you can make and how much time and with what materials. So as you can see, you can make a very nice basket with some crispy, cranky needles. And I hope you enjoyed this video and it helps inspire you to spend some time being creative and coiling a pine needle basket. Thank you. Bye-bye.